Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Identity Insights by Indicio. I'm your host, Tim Spring, and today I'm joined by Indicio's VP of Communications and Governance, Trevor Butterworth, and he's here to discuss the recently updated Beginner's Guide to Decentralized Identity. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us today, Trevor. Before we jump in, could you give a brief overview of what the Beginner's Guide is? Although I know the name kind of gives it away a little bit.
The name does indeed give it away. But one of the things about an emerging technology in which nobody has really encountered all the components before is that it can get really complicated really quickly. And it will, because you tend to talk about all the technical details. On top of that, decentralized identity does a whole bunch of things, right? It's about digital identity, but it's also about the data that can be attached to a digital identity. So it also applies to organizations and things and connected devices as well as people. And it also involves, security and privacy. So it's a protean technology. It's really fantastic. It does all these great things. But it can be really confusing if you to explain or to encounter this. My goal with this document was to try and start at ground zero and incrementally work the reader through step by step, with lots of examples and hopefully and with suggestions about how they can read more. So it's very much a question, which starts with who should control your data,
Great
and
question.
then who should control your data? Well, so and the background to that, obviously, I'm not going to read you the entire document, but the background to that is just the amazing accomplishment that has taken place in the last 50, 60 years. And that is we've gone from, computers being the size of rooms, with tiny, amounts of memory that, that are tiny, to a network of networks that connects 5+ billion people. But of course, as with any project, things start small. So, the internet, in effect, began by connecting two routers together, a router at Stanford and a router at UCLA back in October 1969. And they got two letters. They were able to communicate two letters, L and O, before it crashed. So, and the concept, the idea of having a digital identity back in the, late 60s, early 70s didn't really make sense. Even by the end of the 1970s, you barely had, you didn't even have 100 sort of computers, 100 nodes connected on the internet, and essentially almost it was possible not only to know, well, the identity system that was created was for computers. So you end up, and which ends up as an what we call an IP address. So computers were able to identify each other, and in the early days, pretty much people knew who was using the computers. Even if they could have imagined, almost everybody on, or 2/3 of the planet in 2024 being connected, it's quite possible they couldn't have even solved that problem. But the net result is that there isn't an identity layer for people in the internet. And so how do you identify people? I mean, we do it all the time. Well, we ended up using things like an email address as a kind of proxy for a digital identity. And we use those email addresses to create user accounts. So we ended up, any place we wanted to go, and, whether it was work, whether it was entertainment, whether it was e-commerce, we ended up creating an account, and typically we attached they used our email address to identify us. Now, the net result of this is that identity in terms of the personal data, the digital identifiers that we ended up using in order to identify each other and interact online, were all centralized. They were centralized in these central databases where they were managed. And we would have to log in with a password in order to access our identity, which essentially belonged to whoever owned the centralized database. So there were things, and the short version of what happens from this is you end up with massive identity fraud because it's really easy to either guess somebody's password or fool them into handing over the kind of their login details. So, for instance, in 2022, there were something like 22 billion passwords stolen. And of course, you have all these centralized databases full of personal data. Well, that's just an invitation to hackers to try and steal that information. And of course, even if every person who has an account on that database is absolutely rigorous about good cybersecurity hygiene, it just takes one person to have their data compromised, their login compromised, and somebody can get in and then into that system and steal all the data. The second problem that came from somebody else controlling our data is that they were able to sort of monitor what we did online, and they were using all that, the additional data that we were generating who knows what they were doing with it. We sort of signed away our rights, in one of those kind of I agree to the terms of use of this, in order to, in effect, lease my digital identity. I consent to you following it around the internet, which is why we got that, the pair of shoes we looked at on one site will follow us as an advertisement over others. So all of that is, there's a great word that the Brits use, shonky. All of that shonky infrastructure is really not fit for purpose. I mean, it imposes, an incredible burden on companies, on consumers, on government, in terms of security, in terms of privacy management. Of course, we have all of these data privacy laws that have come about because, there's justifiable outrage about how our data is being used. And that's quite a lengthy introduction or perhaps a digression. The answer to the question is who should store our data is not a third party, but us. We should store our data. And that is essentially what we mean when we say decentralized identity. You get to control your digital identifier. You can create as many digital identifiers as you wish. They can be permanent. No other authority, there's no authority that tells you how they can be used or controls them, I should say, controls them. You can consent to sharing your data because you have control of your data. Anyway, that's the short version.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it because it is, like you mentioned, such a big topic. You really do have to touch on quite a bit to describe even the basics of what decentralized identity is when we say it in that context. I'm curious, right, as obviously Indicio is putting out this beginner's guide, does it go into Indicio's solutions at all, or is it more of a technically agnostic, here are the general principles kind of document?
So it starts with the general principles. Now, obviously, Indicio's technology follows these principles because, we, especially like when we talk about, all the privacy, the ability to share information in a privacy preserving way. I mean, that's one of the hallmarks of the technology we offer. But it is more about how do you think about these general concepts and how do you, how do they contrast with the way things are presently done. So yeah, it's not about selling you, it's selling you an idea. It's not about selling you a product.
That's totally fair. So I am curious about some of those principles, particularly the one where you hold your data on your own person or, hold your data yourself. Because we haven't talked exactly about how that happens yet. I'm curious if there's multiple options, if there's a recommended way. And then as a second part, I'm curious, what is there a why for businesses? Because obviously they want a database of customers, right? Or they want to be able to contact all their customers and have that information. So I'm curious how that'll look on their end.
Okay, so there are two big questions, lots of aspects to them. The key technology that we use to hold data, to issue data, is a verifiable credential. So think of that as it's almost like a container for information. You have somebody has to create the container. So you have they're what's known as an issuer. And the issuer might be a passport office, it might be a bank, somebody or some institution that has, gone through an identity assurance process and then issues a verifiable credential, uh, say for your bank account with the relevant account information in that credential. And so I store that credential in a digital wallet. So I might get, a text message from my bank. There's a QR code saying, would you like to download a verifiable credential? I say yes, or I say no. Scan I scan the, arguably, if it's a QR code, it's likely in an email. So I would scan that from my laptop onto my phone, and I accept the offer for a credential. And then that credential lives in my digital wallet, and I can have any number of credentials. And the credential it's composed of a schema. And the schema contains all the details of, what would go into a bank account credential. So that, and the bank populates the schema with my information, and they digitally sign it so that should I, somebody, or should I want to try and alter that in some way, I can't. It'll break the credential. So then I have that information so that's on my phone. And I can present that information to anybody who has verifying software. And that verifying software can also be on a phone. So I could very quickly issue, make a connection with somebody else and, issue proof that I have a bank account, or I have, I have a passport that's been issued by an official passport office. Now, there's a lot of things that are also happening behind the scenes in order to make this information, verifiable and trustworthy. But the key thing, one of the key problems this solution solves, is that I can prove the authenticity of this container, this verifiable credential, without having to check in with or without you having to check in with the originating source of this credential, the issuer. So you don't have to contact the passport office to say, is this real?
So obviously, right, businesses have databases full of customers currently. I'm curious what this new decentralized method of, holding your identity would look like for a business or organization. Would you be able to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the key to all of, the reason, two key reasons why this is really valuable for business is that you can authoritatively identify your customer, and your customer can authoritatively identify you in any digital interaction. So this is a really powerful way to deal with fraud, right? A verifiable credential that I say, you've issued as a bank, you've issued as an employer. The sort of the cryptographic verification ensures that, and of course, when you add in biometrics so that the person with the, can only access their phone with, facial scans or whatever, it really ensures that you can have confidence that you know who you're talking to. So that solves a huge issue with identity fraud. The second aspect of this is that because verifiable credentials can contain lots of different kinds of information, you now have a really simple way of sharing information between different systems. So typically, in order to integrate database A with database B, you have to do it directly. And that's complex, that's expensive, but you can use a verifiable credential to essentially get information from one database to another. And the verification process ensures that you know it's coming from that database, that it's authentic, and you can verify what the information presented. So that really simplifies so many digital processes, so many analog processes, and enables what we call seamless authentication. So when you think about all of our desire for simplicity when we're interacting digitally and in hybrid interactions in real world, we want things to be instant. We want them to be seamless. We don't want to be futzing around with, multi-factor authentication. We don't want, to risk our personal data. The upshot of this technology is that you can create these seamless processes. So as we have done with our digital travel credential, and you can like cross a border in seconds, right? Because you can authentically, you have that identity layer. You have this, it's not, you have the missing identity layer, the missing verification layer. And that just enables everything to run more efficiently, more smoothly. It also is a way to manage the whole issue of compliance, data protection compliance, because you're not storing data. And then on top of all that, you've got the fraud mitigation. So that's the really, these are huge benefits for everybody, not just business. And of course, it's, in a world of complex digital identity solutions, this is actually very simple to integrate with it works on any system. It doesn't take that long to get up and running, and it's not as expensive as other solutions. So it's like everybody running the race, it gets to be a winner. This is it's really powerful, and hopefully, if you read this beginner's guide, you'll come out really understanding why it is, how it is powerful and how it works, and get ready to embrace what is the future.
Awesome. Well, it looks like that is about the end of our time for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Trevor. Really appreciate your thoughts and insights on this topic. If you at home are interested in learning a bit more about decentralized identity and verifiable credential technology, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. We'll continue to bring you some more educational content. And if you have any questions or specific topics you'd like for us to cover, please go ahead and leave a comment below and we'll be sure to read and address them. Thank you all so much for watching.